morning, everyone. Welcome back for those of you who are with us Monday. Welcome for any of you who couldn't make it with us on Monday to our structured literacy instruction for students with dyslexia and others who struggle to read and write. I'll make sure that I grab all of the resources again for you to make sure that everybody has access to everything. In the meantime, I just do want to start off with some reminders and some resources. We always like to start with a native land acknowledgement. And I will invite and see if there's anyone who is from one of our local tribes who would like to give your acknowledgement or to read ours for us. And I'll read it for you then, that we are, or at least summarize it, we are recognizing that since time immemorial, our ESD is humbly responsible for serving the territories of many Indigenous peoples, including those whose affirmation lies outside U.S. federal recognition. Both prior and during colonial occupation, the migratory histories of the native diasporic peoples, that's why people don't like reading this one, is diasporic, it's a tricky one, have meant life on and stewardship of these lands, air, and waters as sites for human activity since time immemorial. Still, this region presents abundant opportunities to disrupt systemic harm and deliver meaningful, equitable change through service, restorative justice, and collaboration. May we all proceed swiftly and joyfully. As I was reading that, I was thinking about with the word colonial occupation. So much of our language, even yesterday, one of my colleagues in a group used the word stakeholders, and it makes me think of colonial times when people were moving west and they would plant their stake in the ground to claim that land away from the people who were already there. And I keep thinking, I've recently came up with a better word and then I can't remember what it was, but we need to think about our language and what it means to people. So I appreciate just a moment for us all to reflect upon that. I also have a cultural acknowledgement or a recognition of the pain and trauma from over 400 years of the racism in the United States. And it's a pledge to stand with our communities of color, especially those who identify as and/or are categorized as African American, recognizing the intersectionality of those who identify both as persons of color and as individuals with disabilities. It is a commitment to centering our work to dismantling systemic racism and disrupting ableist structures. As a reminder, we do have these guideposts throughout to clue us onto when there is an opportunity for you to have a handout that you can print, an activity, something that we'll be doing, a time to process and reflect, some practical strategies that you can take and use with you in your class, and then resources are usually websites that you can check out and learn more. So I do have some Zoom requests, I should say, rather than tips. I see most people have already put your name and your district. If you don't know how to do that, you can access the participants list and to find your name and when you access that, one of the options is rename. You can see under more, there's rename, and you can rename yourself. You can also do it if you hover over your picture, go up to where it says, there's a little blue box in the upper right-hand corner, and with 3 dots and 3 white dots. And when you open that up, change rename is one of those options, as well as hide self-view, so you don't have to see yourself as we're talking. You are all muted upon entry, but please feel free to unmute to engage at any point in time. Good morning, Carolyn. And when it says video on, I do appreciate those of you who give me some nonverbal feedback. If you don't have your video on, I understand. It is especially useful when we go into breakout rooms. The communication icons, I actually think I turned off these ones in the middle, so we don't need to worry about those anymore. If I'm wrong, let me know. But the reason why I like to indicate those is, one, some people like to engage that way, but also that's where you find the electronic raised hand option. Okay, and then annotate will be giving you opportunities to write on the screen and engage in that way. And to do that, when you click on this up here by it says where you are viewing my screen, where there you see the view options. One of the options is to annotate. When you click that bar and then click that button, it has a pencil on it. It'll bring up this toolbar. And whenever you are writing or drawing with something, this button will change the color of what you are writing with. There are some stamps here that we'll be using actually on the next slide, because I do like to say what brings us here, and invite you to engage in this belief slide. I should have put an engagement icon. I'll have to make a note to do that here. So if we kind of remember, this is a place where you can engage and put into the chat box, or to stamp what is something that you connect with, or what words here resonate with you. You'll notice if you were here on Monday that the other slide I had took this off, because for me, while building relationship with all students, of course, is paramount and important, so are these relationships between you and everyone else in your building, with the administrators, with the paraprofessionals, with these interventionists and the specialists, and our communities and our families and the parents. All of those relationships will impact positive change, both for our students and for our communities. So thank you for engaging and putting some stamps, because of course, all of these are aspects of the relationships are about the first step. Then we need to do something with that relationship that we've built. And so hence the quality teaching, the growth mindset, which of course believes that all students can learn, because this all here, for me, is the most important word that we have. Not only all, but also yet. Sometimes when I go out and I work with a district, particularly if I've come and talked, there have been some districts where I had to do got to do a parent presentation, and sometimes the parents were not very happy with the districts. And I would go over to the whiteboard and I would write this really important yet very small word, and that is yet. We may not be where we need to be, but we're working on it. And so let's work together through these relationships to get there. That's the growth mindset. That's the active engagement. That's the professional development that's going to build our our quality teaching to get us where we need to go. So let's all keep in mind the power of yet, the power of relationships, the power of each other. And let's jump back into what we were working on Monday. So just a few requests, because we do have some new people with us. Reminders for those who were here with us Monday to please stay engaged, refrain from judgment, share openly, expect non-closure, use the technology to enhance your learning, and above all, most importantly, to give ourselves and each other grace. Thank you. Yes. Oh, and I don't know what's going on with this culture right now, but I see my own kids constantly, I don't know how to do that. So number one, yet. Number two, try to either figure it out or you ask. Don't just like, oh, well, throw your hands up. I don't know how to do it. So something we're all working on, aren't we? Okay, there's the attendance form for those of you who've joined in since I put it in. A reminder of our goals, where we are going. And before we jump too farther, I'm going to actually give us a moment to pause on these and think about what we've done so far. We were really looking at structured literacy instruction, explicit literacy instruction. We were looking last time at phonology. Today we'll be looking at orthography and etymology a bit. And then next week we'll be talking about the rest of them, morphology, syntax, and semantics. But I do want to give people an opportunity to pause and reflect and share something that's been kind of going around in your mind as since we have last met. Here's our outline, and here's what we addressed last time, was the phonology and phonemic awareness. So I'm going to pause and just open it up to the floor for all of you, and just see if there's something that's been kind of going around in your mind, something you've been thinking about, something you'd like to either question or share since we last talked. And I will put this link into the chat box for you as well. And I'll get those resources for you too. Something's coming in chat. The attendance is just today. So each day you are here, you will need to sign in the attendance, because you will get clock hours for the hours that you attend. And is your name pronounced King? Well, we notice we don't have a U on that one. We were watching a video this morning of why there's often a U after a Q, but
it's pronounced with a CH sound.
So sing or
Ching.
ching? A CH then?
Yeah, ching. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll write that down so I remember next time. Okay. Is there anybody who would like to share something you've been thinking about since Monday?
I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend. We had other PDs that we needed to do Monday.
Understandable. Tina, I think I recognize you from other trainings, though. That's why I thought you were with us on Monday.
Yeah, I like your classes, so I find the ones I can. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I did put in a needs analysis for everyone, which I think would be useful for us, as well as I'm going to put in the resources. The needs analysis does contribute so we can get to know this group and what this group's needs are. For anybody who was here on Monday but wasn't able to access the chat and the attendance, when you fill out today's attendance, you can simply put in parentheses, was also present Monday, but didn't get a chance to sign in, so that when my support provider helps him and puts in the attendance, she can make a note of that. All right, well, last time we talked about the phonemes and we talked about consonants and talked about vowels. So let's jump into, as a reminder and playing around with this, thinking about what's the first sound of all of these. We're going to do these whole group so that rather than a small group, because not everyone was here. And I want you to think about what are the first sounds. I'm going to take some volunteers, people who were here or people who weren't here yet last time and who are feeling confident, who want to think about what is the first sound or what's the difficulty with these. And one that I mentioned last time, but I think would be useful for us to add, is this one as well. So who would like to take any word you want? And let's just process a few of these before we jump into how these are represented in print. This one's an easy one, right? Potato. It's a real quick potato. Let me underline this instead. How about though this one? Is that one quite so easy to pull off the pretzel? Thanks, Tina. It's a little bit hip. This one, we have the pharaoh, right? It's not a p, even though you see it that way. Let me hear from the group, someone telling us what is the first sound in this. Not the first two sounds. Go ahead, Tina.
I would qua, but that's the first two sounds.
Oh, I think I heard you.
Quiet is the word.
Uh-huh.
Qua.
Keep pull. You've got two sounds there still. I think I thought I heard it when you first unmuted. What was the first?
Qua. Or it's
like in cats, isn't it? Like in cats and cat.
Yeah.
Because your mouth goes
Qua.
from to woo. This is actually something I've been kind of arguing about and playing around with for a while. I wish we taught it that this makes k and this makes woo, because that is really the case. If you were here watching the video that we saw as we were starting to come in, there was a video by Erica Okrent on why that U is there and the pronunciation and everything. This actually used to be spelled before the French invaded. It was spelled with a CW. And then the French invaded and we said, nope, we're going to spell it with QU. Okay. But it is a k woo. The U also make woo in other cases, like in sweet and language. So it's not all that unheard of for that you'd make that woo sound even without the Q. Now together they are going to make woo. But good job getting there, because this is one of the really tricky ones, is that you making the woo sound. This one's a little bit tricky with the k and chorus, right? What about these two? What's the first sound in both of those? Yesterday and unicorn. Those two start the same way, don't they? How tricky for some of our kids. What's the first sound here? And I think I saw you unmute. You want to try it, Anne? What's that first sound? That's a like a wrestle or rap or wrist. We'll talk later about why that spell with the WR. Here we have the thimble, and therefore, what about this one? That's a zh we talked about. How on earth you spell zh? I was working on a program last week, and someone said, well, you only assess the kids in 30 of the sounds of the language, not all 44. And I thought, okay, how are you going to give them give kids a prompt to see whether or not they know zh? I'm like, good luck with that. That's a tricky one. Okay, this one is a hard one because even when I look at it, trident, how often do we clearly say trident? It becomes more of a ch, doesn't it? Trident. That's a hard one. Same thing with drastic, becomes drastic, a j sound. Symbol, not so hard. And mnemonic, and f. What about this one? What's the first sound? Everyone always loves to tell me it's a t, but is it really? Say it naturally. I'll see you tomorrow. Becomes more of a d sound, doesn't it? Tricky, isn't it? Trickier than it seems. All right, so we'll just do, I know everyone is slowly warming up to engaging today, but you can either put some things into the chat box or use your annotation here so you don't have to talk because everyone's saying, I'm not talking yet this morning. How many sounds in these? I'll start out with an easy one. Leg. This one, we're not going to do with the airs. The airs are just too hard. But this one's a hard one. It's important to we already talked about the ku, air. Where, air. Some people do air as air or air as in one. So this could be one or two, depending on how you pronounce that. This is an important one to look at. How many are in flex?
Would it be 4?
Oh, what was that, Wendy?
5
Oh.
because the X has the X.
Oh,
X. Mhm.
It's funny. There was one of these sessions that I was teaching this class. I think it took someone 5 minutes. It felt like for me to get to her to say, "Oh, we got her there," to recognize that it's 2 sounds. Or if it's at the end, it's 2 sounds. Or if it's in the middle, it might be 2. Also, the g is like an exit. The only time when the X makes 1 sound is if it's at the beginning of a Greek word, like in Xerox or Xerxes. Everyone else, it's two sounds. And that's why our kids, when we teach them tax and tax, this is where morphology is so crucial for them to know which one is it. Is it he has to pay his tax, then it's 1 letter, or it's more than 1 tack, in which case tax, tax, and tax, they're both homonyms. No, Anne, we're not mating for new people. We're reviewing from last time. People come in when they come in, and we are recording. All right, any other weird, interesting ones to look at? I'll underline a few more that we should practice. Let's try this one. This one's a good one. Let's do this one. A, whoever put that 3, I'm going to cross off your go ahead, Wendy. This because you are right.
Can you go over this square again of like, because you say it's 4, but if you go you go the air, or what is the whole AR thing? You said sometimes
The air
you
is
do 2
hard.
sounds or not.
That's why I got rid of the air for, because
Right.
I have seen air looked at by some linguists as 1, some as 2. That's a hard piece. The R controlled. When I and actually I'm working on my own book on this, that R's really affect the vowels and make things difficult when it comes to determining how many sounds. So it is important for us to think about how many sounds air, I would probably do 5.
Yeah.
But some people might do air as 1. It all depends on how slowly you're sounding that out.
Yeah, because isn't one of the things is if your chin goes down, then that's another, you have those 2 sounds there.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Your
I just
chin-
wanted to know what your thoughts were.
Yeah, your chin note goes down for different vowels though, and
Vowels.
we're talking about syllables. Here we're
Yeah.
talking about individual sounds, and that, like the same thing with therefore, air, or, and really linguists are gonna say that the sound is really the one that's one sound but I find for teaching it, I mean, I will teach I'll teach R, and I'll teach or as a combined, but not necessarily one. I say that this is the R influence, which is very, very difficult.
May I ask a question?
Of course, anytime.
Um,
Anne is not able to hear anyone. Hopefully you could see the closed captions, and maybe if you went out and came back in, that'll be fixed. Go ahead, Tina.
you had mentioned something depends on how slow they're sounding it out. Is there, I guess, a right and wrong length to sound out? Because that can start the confusion in itself.
Definitely. And so here's one. I'm going to look at these 2. Think about the ch in porch, or we'll do scorch, but you have the coming before the ch. So, or let's do, we've got the or. Let's do bench. It would be a clearer one to do this illustration between these 2. If we have b, n, and then we have ch, one sound, right? But the ch here is the same as the ch here. But Tina, when you said, does it matter how slowly you go? There are some kids who say they feel a t before the ch in this. And one of the things that we were talking about on Monday is that the ch sound is actually a t and a sh really quickly smushed together. So it's the ch equals t plus sh. So hence those kids who go too slowly on this, they're going to go p at sh. And then they might be confused, like, wait a minute, you're spelling sh with a ch. Well, I could, yes, because that's French. You could be the French, like in chaparral or chichi or quiche. I'm trying to think of other.
But is that then when you would go back to the rule of, okay, there's a vowel, so I use the TCH, where the other one is CH.
Yes.
There's a consonant, right?
That's when your recognition of those spelling patterns comes in. And Wendy, there are some people like Denise Ide who calls them rules. I would call it a pattern that remember, and this is something we're going to be talking about today, that the TCH comes at the end of a word right after a short vowel. We use the TCH instead of CH after that, the short A. Here we have a short E, and we're using a CH because we have a consonant there, and we'll do lots of practices. And this is where we come into the understanding reading through writing. We're going to really do a speech to print approach where we're recognizing these connections and why would you use one versus the other. Excellent questions. The rouge is a hard one. We had the genre on the last one, and O, P, A. Tricky, isn't it? Dodge is another one. D, A, J. Just 3 sounds. Trident, t, here, t, r, I. We have to slow it down. This is like when your kids say choo choo train. And it's like, okay, chew and chew is fine, but train is actually t, r, train. You have to really help them feel what it would be like so that when they are going to spell it, they can reduce those complications. All right, let's get into, though, that actually one last thing that I really didn't talk about last time when we talking about phonemes, where things can be difficult and confusion. We talked about co-articulation a little bit yesterday or Monday, but I do want to stress that that's what makes things difficult, is that when it feels like they're together, like train is a perfect example. That T and the R, we say so quickly, it feels like a ch, choo-choo train. So we need to help our kids slow down. I worked with a speech language pathologist who once said, pull it apart like a rubber band. So when your rubber band is squished together, it feels like one word squished together. There's actually a great quote I have somewhere from Mark Seidenberg, who says that letters on a page are like beads on a string. We can see them easily. But words are like the water in a waterfall. They just squish together, and it's hard then to pull them apart and find the individual molecules, if you will, between each one. And they are co-articulated. We say them together and they get so smushed that we have to get our kids, when they translate those smushed sounds into what's on print, then they have to really slow down and feel those differences in the t, r, a, n, and train instead of train. We've talked a little bit about those influence of those consonants, particularly the nasals, the m and the n, and that nasty r. But even the L, remember in the word all, where we had, it's not al, it's all, and ball and fall. And then the voice glottal stop is the g and the ng, and then that can be as well as difficult. So your nasal ng and the k and the g, g. We talked about the flaps like in butter. Endings often gets deleted when we talk. I'm going swimming. We have to remember that when we write and we read, that we are going to have to put those endings back in. Even if we don't write going with an N or swimming, but we write it going, swimming. So that ing is something that we have to think about. And then, of course, with the schwa, how when we talk about it's very, very hard for spelling, but it's easier for reading. And remember, we talked about this a lot. Phonemes are distinguished by how they're articulated, much more than sound. Okay, let's get into sound symbol correspondences. Oh dear, Anne is not able to join us. Let me try to stop share and reshare. And hopefully, let me see, maybe log out and come back in. A blank Zoom page. I will stop share and reshare and see if that helps too. I always say technology is great until it's not. Okay, let's get into how do we attach these symbols to the sounds? Because the most important thing we teach our kids is that speech is represented by print. It is done so imperfectly, yet predictably. All right, so let's jump into sound symbol correspondences. These are the results from this group, from the 11 of the 14 of you, those of you who were able to fill this out before coming today. I did put the link in for those of you who haven't done it. Thank you, Anne. Good morning, I just clicked over and saw you joining us as well. So you'll see that it's interesting because the phonemes were about the same, that we had a lot of people saying all across the map between 1, I'm not very comfortable, don't know much, to 10. We actually our high is 9, with the majority saying that I feel pretty strong about this. So it's really awesome. But yet I will say that I'm always in the, I feel strong, but there's always more to learn. So this is a reminder of where we were talking yesterday about those phonological awareness levels, and that we really need to be able to get our students to manipulate those sounds, to delete them, reverse them, substitute them. Reversing is a harder one, but definitely the substitution and deletion. And I'm going to show you how to get to those handouts in case you weren't here with us on Monday. So that, because we're about to take those phonological awareness and then also look at the next side, which is the influence of these phonological awareness on our reading. So I'm going to go to not our Jamboard, which hopefully everyone has. If you don't, I can get it for you. I didn't get a chance to go into introductions, but I think everyone knows this. I wanted to jump right in. So there's our Jamboard, so you can share who is here. Also, there is a place for your, the other direction. A Jamboard for parking lot for any questions or comments. And if you came in before I shared, anybody in ESD 121, I have the link here for I's Fellows application. And then we also will have some other activities later on. But let's go to our resources. And again, if you, let me see, I did put it up in, but in case you came in afterwards, there it is. Our tinyurl.com explicit literacy instruction will take you to this. And at the top, there is this tinyurl.com dyslexia 101 handouts. So we're going to follow that. There we go. And what we're looking at is the Kilpatrick table. So Kilpatrick chart, you'll see. Whoops, that's not the right one. Love it when you click before it settles in. Oh, it worked. There we go. Not screening for indicators. Kilpatrick chart, that one. So we talked Monday about the phonological development. Now we're moving into the reading development. So on that side, this is through the research from David Kilpatrick, the reading development side. I hope I didn't click twice. My computer is moving slowly today. Sorry. Yep, it went twice. Let's go back. Here we go. Is that on that right-hand side, we have to think about the fact that first, when we're starting to learn to read, we need to learn our letter sound knowledge, right? We need to learn the forms of our letters, their names, and the sounds. So those all need to be linked together. Those skills lead to my ability to convert those letters to sounds and to blend them to read real words, which leads to my ability to orthographically map those sounds, which means I'm making a strong connection between those sounds and the symbols. And I do that by segmenting the blended words. So I'm going to pause for a moment and put in a poll to see if anybody here is familiar with this or can kind of map or gauge your familiarity with the term orthographic mapping, because that will give me some indication of how in depth and how much time to spend on this concept, because it's, oh, good. We've had nobody so far never heard of it. I'll give you a moment with that. It's a term that, okay, we do have someone, so thank you for your honesty. It's a term that I think is not well enough understood, but extremely important in learning to remember words. I'll do a little bit of a preview for people who weren't with us last time. I'll jump to our slide. If you remember the steps to reading words with the little kids, and I'll bring it back up as soon as we're done with our poll here. And in that steps to reading words, if you'll recall, the last two, the kids could sound out words. But the difference between them was that the farthest one, let's see, we're only going to get 58%. Some people might have stepped away. All right, we got to 66%. We'll leave it there then, because we've got a pretty interesting heterogeneous group. I'll share those results. Notice we have majority have a vague idea. Some have never heard of it, and some have heard of it, but not sure what it means. So I'm going to jump us to those steps just to give us some context here before we explain what orthographic mapping is. So let me jump to that. Unfortunately, this gets to be a very, very big slide deck. Okay, it was, here it is, steps to reading words. You remember we saw this last time, and we talked about these 4 stages in learning to read individual words. Notice number 3 and number 4, those are those 2 that I was talking about. Orthographic mapping is the difference between number 3 and number 4. Orthographic mapping takes your kids from having to sound out the word every time they see it to remembering it. It's the process by which we remember words that we have sounded out. So notice for number 3, he's reading that word spent. Number 4, she's able to read spent, and even in Carpenter, she reads those chunks first. Carpenter, she's able to map those connections and remember them. By map, it's kind of like creating a connection between them. So let me go back to our orthographic mapping. Okay, I went too far. Nope, here we go. So let me get into the orthographic mapping piece and what an explanation of it. So first off, I'm going to put a line here because what's above the line is our phonic decoding. That's sounding the words out. That's what my young man in the number 3 was able to do. Then the bottom of the line is the orthographic mapping, this process that gets him to his next step, which is where the young lady was. So this is what the child sees. This is what they say. So in the first line here, you see, I'm going to get my annotations, that my student sees this and says, he sounds it out if he needs to, it, blends it to make sit. Here he says, he notices the I consonant E represents I, and the T represents T, blends it to make sit. And here we have, sight, sorry, I, T, and here we have sight. So we have sit and sight and sight. These two he learns by recognizing the meaning. So that's where he has to remember the meaning represents the different spellings, different meanings, different spellings. So then for a strong natural reader, this will happen implicitly in their brains. For some of our weaker readers, we need to support this through spelling. Then they think about, what were those sounds? What were the three sounds in that word? It. So this is the segmenting part. You pull those sounds apart, and then you think about, you go back and look, what were the ways that we represented each sound in print? So in this case, the S was represented by an S, the I was represented by an I, and the T by a T. And you'll notice I'm going to go through this same process if it is a simple one-to-one correspondence, or if it's a more complex, what I'm going to call later, a 1-to-2, where there's more than one way of representing that same sound. I'm going to go through the same process, but I have to connect and think about, how was the S represented? In this case, the T was the same, and now the I is an I consonant E. In the case of this word, the I is an IGH. This is where the meaning comes into play, because I have to remember that this site is a place, and this site has to do with something I see. It was a beautiful sight, which could be both. I saw a beautiful site that was a construction site. So construction site, something I saw with my eyes. So this is where meaning comes into play. And if we remember that triangle we had earlier last time between these, let me make it actually where it won't fade away, between the orthography at the top, that's the spelling, and the phonology, the sounds, and the semantics, that the meaning. Remember, meaning is the hook when we have to remember two different spellings of the same sound. Meaning is going to play a much stronger relationship in with that. Okay, we're doing okay with this. I'm going to give you a moment to process and talk to each other about it after I have one more slide where we're going to talk about how these influence each other. So going back to that table I showed you, that handout, this is what it looks like. And one of the things that's easy for us to think of is that your early skills support your advanced skills on both sides. So your early skills in phonological development and your early skills in your reading development supports your development of the next one. When I say supports, it's helpful and it helps you do those. It doesn't mean that you must be able to rhyme before we can start working on phonemes. I need to stress that very, very clearly. You do not have to master rhyming before you start working with phonemes. You can be doing these concurrently. The better you are at rhyming, the more easily you will be able to achieve this basic phonemic awareness. But it's not that one has to be mastered before you can do the others. They can blend together. And your biggest bang for your buck with your kindergartners is to jump here. Yes, continue to build their awareness of rhymes and alliteration, but this is the biggest bang for your buck because this is where you're talking about individual sounds. Because that's what's going to be related and imprint is those individual sounds. So that's where we need to start really focusing them. So then, of course, we recognize that my early ability to rhyme helps me support my understanding of letter names and letter sounds. If they, especially alliteration, if they think of Aunt Allie's alligator, I start noticing they all start with the same letter. So this supports and helps me with this. As does my ability to blend and segment sounds, helps me then translate them and to blend them into individual words. And then when I segment them, I can start manipulating them and changing them, and that helps me remember them. But once you start this reading process, it gets a lot more complicated because I'm going to add some more arrows. Learning my letters and letter names at the beginning there. I'm going to erase that because it's a lot here for you. Helps support my ability to recognize that each word has individual sounds. All those different sounds make up these words. And then once I then decode them, I can start paying attention to the internal sounds and noticing that clash and crush only change by one sound and it's in the middle. If I change the L to an R, it's a whole new word. And I'm recognizing those differences. So these skills support each other for my goal of orthographic mapping, which is how I remember these words. Complex, I know. I'm going to give you a pause, reflect time, and then we'll talk about how. So it's the reading process where, yes. A.M. Junkin, the reading process is where dyslexia causes the problems because our students with dyslexia, I'll go back to this slide, where they struggle specifically is one, there are many places, but it's the phonological awareness here. They struggle connecting our letter sound knowledge and remembering that, which of course influences this and of course influences this, because maybe they're struggling with basic, maybe they're struggling with advanced, but it's a struggle with the phonological awareness and phonemic awareness that really struggles in not only sounding words out, but then remembering those words that they've sounded out. So this is definitely a piece that's extremely important in our reading, and I feel like it's very misunderstood. All right, you need a pause and reflect time. I'm going to give you an opportunity to share and chat with each other. I'm going to pause the recording.
She would do
Yeah,
it. So
I
going
was
to go ahead
the-
and do it. I've done it the other day. So
yeah.
here.
So, like
Wow.
Anne was saying, we were just talking about our backgrounds and how we would, Anne and Carolyn, we were all in the same group, and we were just talking about how we could apply the knowledge that we're going to learn today or like throughout the various sessions on how we can reach those kids that we're working with. I think I have like the least amount of understanding of everything, so I'm kind of just soaking it all in, but Carolyn and Anne have a little more background with it, but we're all just here to figure out how we can get to these kids. One of the main things was how we can assess them and figure out where they're specifically struggling and how we can make life a little easier with their reading experience.
Thank you, Lauren.
Did I miss anything, guys? We're good. Okay.
You're getting some thumbs up from your peers. I will say when you mention that this is newer for you, I've had people who will hear me say something 5 or 6 times, and on the 6th time say, "Oh, now I get it." Sometimes it takes a few times for you to just. You have to be in the right space. You have to have the right background knowledge. You have to have your Velcro has to be ready. You know?
I feel like I'm gonna be in your next session too, just so I can because I
Little
know
by
it
little.
might not stick fully this time, but we're gonna keep
little by
trying.
little, and
Yeah.
the more you use it, the more it will come naturally as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for room 3. Would someone from either room 1 or 2 like to share?
I'm not sure
have
what
to-
room we were in. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just going to say I'll have to try and tell people that you can jump in even mid class so we can have more people next week. Go ahead, Tina.
Sorry, I don't remember what room I was
You were in
in.
room 1. I'm
Oh,
looking
room
for-
1. Thank you, everyone. We are just thankful for this opportunity, I think is what I grabbed the most out of our reflection, and just understanding we've got a different levels of students due to COVID that
Mhm.
attempting to get even like the upper grades and having a better understanding of how frankly the brain works and retains all of this was much of our conversations.
I can appreciate that. Thank you, Tina. And room 2, if you'd like, you can jump in. there's anyone else who'd like to add on to something that's already been said or your own, I always like to keep that door open.
I just, I just realized, when we really stop to think about reading and what that must be like for a student to not be getting it. I had a roommate who told me the greatest thing that ever happened to her. She ended up getting her doctorate, but she was 13. And that's when they assessed her as dyslexia. And she said she had no idea what was wrong with her. She thought she was stupid. We really have to remember, these students can go through quite the trauma about their learning if they do not understand why they are not keeping up and everybody else is so far ahead of them. So it really is a very important thing.
In my Padlet are some, and I'll take us to there to illustrate, there are some very powerful stories and individual stories of students. And one of the most, I'm not sure if it's there, I'm going to check and see. If it's not there, I will definitely put it in. When I was testifying in support of the law that was passed in Oregon, that we had huge number of people testifying. And in the first group was I can never remember, she was either the Speaker of the House or the House Majority Leader. And her story had us all in tears and she didn't believe that she was smart until she was 46 years old. She was told that she wasn't college material. She was told that she would, she said in elementary school and middle school, they always had spelling bees. And the one time that she didn't came in second to last, everyone applauded because she wasn't last. Like she had always been. They had a turtle on the wall with her name on it because she wrote so slowly. Her story was just heart-wrenching. Mm-hmm. She said she lived in fear that someone was going to, even though she won all these awards for her business acumen, she was an extremely successful business person. She was afraid that someone was going to come and tap her on the shoulder and say, "You don't belong here. You're not smart enough to be in this room." And it wasn't until she was elected to the House of Representatives that in Oregon, where she had all these bills, and she called a friend. She said, "I can't do this. It's too much reading. I can't do this." And her friend said, "Yes, you can. Here's a phone number." She got herself diagnosed. She got herself help. And it was really a powerful turnaround for her to say, then advocate for the law and say, we cannot have our kids thinking they're stupid until they're 46 years old, which was her story. I don't see it here, but I will put a note to myself to put it in after the end of the day, because it's a very, very powerful video of that experience, and everyone who contemplate or shared their own experiences for that. But I think that talking about that experience is a great segue into thinking about how we build automatic word recognition. I did click, there we go. Because so often we are taught, just read to your children, or we're told, or just read to your children. When they see and they hear these words, they're going to pick them up. And for some of us, that may be the case. I was one that I noticed the word "the," and I pointed to it and I said, "Is that the word the?" Because I heard it the most often and I saw it the most often. I recognized that statistical regularity. I was up there in that green zone. For the majority of our kids, this does not lead to this automatic word recognition. There's more that we need to do. So then research, we thought, okay, if I decode the words, I sound them out, I will be able to remember the words and have automatic word recognition. But this is actually not true. There's more that we need to do. This is this orthographic mapping piece that connects and takes us from sounding the words out to being able to remember them automatically next time I see them. So I think this is a really crucial piece that is missing. Unfortunately, I think that too many people think that we can stop here at decoding the words. We must think about orthographic mapping. We must go back and spell the words and pay attention to those sound symbol correspondences and the symbol sound correspondences in order to build our skills of automatic word recognition. Feeling good with that? Let's jump into our speech to print. That speech to print, the alphabetic knowledge, alphabetic principle. Number one, I think the most important thing we need to keep in mind, as I've said already, and I will say it again and again, letters and letter patterns represent the sounds of spoken language in an imperfect but predictable way. I keep searching for the right conjunction to go here. So if anybody has any ideas, because it's imperfect and predictable. It's imperfect, yet it's predictable. It's imperfect, but it's predictable. Those are all concurrent. This is the most important thing we can teach our kids. And when I say it's imperfect, we don't write, as we talked about on Monday, we don't write, I don't know. We write, I do not know. We don't write, gee, yet. We don't write, Those are things that we don't write it in that way. But we can write, I don't know, or I do not know, in a way that when I read it, I can read it as, I don't know, depending on how quickly I read it. This knowledge is crucial for development of phonic decoding skills. And normally we learn our letter names first, or then our letter shapes and letter sounds. There are some programs that will skip the letter names or postpone them till after letter sounds. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. Frankly, letter names are the one thing you can hang your hat on. This is the one thing I'm going to draw a solid line under, because that is the one consistent feature of letters, is the name. It's called a B regardless of how you make it. If you make it like this, if you make it like this, if you make it like this, doesn't matter. It is still, or all these different fonts. It's still going to be called a B. The letter name is the one consistent factor. Shapes may vary. Many of them represent more than one sound. The B is not one of them, but the name is the consistent feature. So hence there is an advantage to starting there. Notice how I said, I'm going to repeat this again and again. I'm going to highlight this. That speech is represented in print imperfectly and yet predictably. However, there is ambiguity in both. Notice how when I speak, it's temporary. Unless I record it, it's gone. Whereas print is more permanent. They both have ambiguity, though. And we talked a little bit about this ambiguity here when we have a word that sounds the same, but it's spelled in different ways. That's in the example of sight, sight, and sight, bear and bear, pair and pair. We have a lot of homophones. In fact, we have a lot more homophones than we have homographs. And there's a reason for this. When I look at these homographs, let me take a look and stamp some of these. I think, is this wind or wind? Yep. Dove or dove, read or read, sower, sewer, live, live. I have to look at the context to figure out which one. Now, if English were just a verbal language, it wouldn't matter. I could spell all of this the same way and it wouldn't matter because I'm hearing it with my ears. The context clues me in. However, when I'm reading with my eyes, it is so much faster to have these spelled differently. It reduces the cognitive load on a reader to have these spelled differently. Now, for a writer, of course, that's difficult because I have to remember what it means and that meaning spelling connection. But for a reader, it's very fast. I can just look at it and know the meaning and how those differ. I know that this is an animal and this means without clothes. Just by looking at it, I don't have to look at the context like I do for these. So that's one of the reasons why when your kids are going to disparage and say there are so many words that are spelled differently and sound the same way, you're like, yeah, that's an advantage. When it comes to reading, it makes it easier for you. It's harder for spelling, but it's easier for reading. So this is one of the things to keep in mind of those homophones. Because too, when we see a word, we are seeing so much more than how to pronounce it. So I've created this acrostic or a poem based on, it was Virginia Berninger and Beverly Wolf in their book, Teaching Students with Dyslexia, Dysgraphia, and Oral Language Difficulties. They said every teacher needs to have a POM certificate. So every teacher needs to understand the phonology of how words sound. They need to understand orthography, those spelling patterns and conventions. And they need to understand morphology, those meaningful parts of words. I've added the E because I feel like etymology and history helps us understand orthography and morphology. And then, of course, you can make it plural by adding the syntax and semantics. I think these are the crucial pieces to understanding words. Because when you see a word, you're not just seeing those sounds. Look at, example here, what we say. We say, this isn't at, it's what. And I have that WH making a woo sound. But this WH also indicates to me that it's a question word. Print ed here, that's not too much of a problem. But what if it slipped? That ED can make 3 different sounds. And it doesn't matter how it sounds, it's still the morpheme of the past tense. So these are things that we need to think about, that what we see in print represents so much more than just sounds. And people who say that English is very, very difficult because things aren't spelled the way they sound, that is because our language is morphophonemic. It's not a phonetic language, it's morphophonemic. We have to understand morphology and phonology in order to read English, because sometimes these purposes will override. And if there's going to be a war between phonemes and morphemes wins, people. Because the whole point is how to identify words as quickly as possible. Let me give you a couple of conflicts, examples of this. Look at this word. If we spelled it the way it sounds, we would completely lose its connection to the word knowledge. To know something. And actually, if you look at history and some other related languages, and if you watch Outlander, you'll know that when they say, you know, they say you can. And I'm like, there's that K. So that K does show it. Same thing with the number 2, they'll say toi in Gaelic and the Welsh languages. So that 2, the W is connecting in meaning to 20 and twist and 12 and twin. That W represents its two-ness. If I spelled it this way, I would lose that. Or if I spell it T-O, I would lose that. So I have to have some differentiation among those homonyms to represent different meanings. Here's another one, jumped. Could you imagine if we spelled those E-T, the way it sounds? I'd struggle. I mean, yes, I could pronounce jumped, but that ED is a clue to the past tense. Okay, so I have a question for you. When we're talking about regularity of sound symbol correspondences, why don't you put your number in the chat box? What percentage of everyday English words would you say are oddballs, irregularly spelled? Yeah, let's see your thoughts before we move on. As I mentioned, we're gonna have lots of opportunity for engagement. I can see some pensive faces. Let's see what's coming in. 30, 25, 30, 25, 50. I think it depends on how you just define irregular. So let's look at some stats. 50% are truly one-to-one. So Tina, maybe that's where you were thinking of irregular. Those would be things like cat and dog. There's really only one way to make those. But you can get another 34% correct with only one error, like the S in island. We can do an additional 12% correctly spelled if we have some additional knowledge, like morphology and etymology. Really, according to Louisa Moats, only 4% are truly odd. And frankly, some of the ones that she says are odd, I would disagree with, because I could explain why things are spelled that way. So maybe it's because my additional knowledge keeps growing and my percentage is going to keep getting smaller here. As we know more, we learn more and do better, right? This island made me think of a video I saw once on, I think it was on Facebook, and I couldn't unfortunately grab the video, but this woman plays both English and Spanish is trying to understand English spelling. And so this board you see, and she says that, well, we spell French words like French and Arabic words like Arabic, and we spell the German and Danish. We have all these influences and we spell them that way. And so when the Spanish asks about the S in island, that, are you ever going to pronounce it? Nope. Are you going to ever get rid of it? Nope, it's like the throw pillow spelling. So you have to think about, you have to get creative and pay attention to those things. But here are a couple things on research that we do need to make sure we recognize and acknowledge how print and sound related. It really enables those other components of reading. We do need to be able to automatically, fluently, and rapidly decode isolated words. And of course, that letter sound knowledge being crucial to both phonic decoding and sight word learning. So how do we develop them? We have to have that memory for sounds and letters. But as I said earlier, remember that meaning is the hook. So if I gave you these three lists of letters, I need to fix the font so they're all the same. My question to you is, which one would you be able to remember most easily? You can put it at a stamp or put the number into the chat box. I think everyone's going to be saying one, aren't you? Because you have meaning to them. You know that FBI has to do with someone who's like a detective. This, you may not remember what it stands for, but you have meaning to it. Sherry, you're saying 3. Tell me more. Every now and then I get someone who says 3.
Hi, yeah. So 3, FBI,
Mm.
NFL, and IRS, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you meant you didn't mean this list number 3. You meant this one that I have labeled number 1.
Right.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
just checking on that. But every now and then someone will say, "Well, I can make words out of them," but you might not be able to spell those words correctly. And number 2, we get sometimes special education folks, because CEC is Council for Exceptional Children. This is National Association of School Psychologists, and individualized education. Individualized IEE, individualized educational evaluation. I thought it was IE. No, that's right. And evidence-based reading instruction. But the majority of you say number 1 because you have meaning to that. But that's the important piece, is that it is our phonological memory that helps us remember words more so than visual. This is one of the things that I actually have a survey sometimes I do and ask people, is it visual or is it auditory and your phonological memory that helps us learn words? It's actually our phonologic, not our input. Our input helps us get there, but we have to make that connection between that input and the sounds and the meaning for it. Because remember, this is that triangle that I brought up earlier that I was drawing for you. Remember that connection between the sounds, the meaning, and the written form. Okay, when we get into those sound symbol correspondences, remember I said that I call some of them green, yellow, or red. The green ones are those one-to-one correspondences. I can just look at it and read it. Those are that 50% that we were just talking about, Tina, when you said about 50% irregular. It depends on your degree of irregularity. Is it really, really weird, or is it somewhat weird? And so that's why I kind of differentiate between the somewhat weird, that's the yellow flag word, so I have to slow down and think. And then the really, really weird ones are the red, that let's just memorize these, because frankly, that UGH, it could be like in a laugh and enough, or rough. It could be silent, like in dough. I have a colleague who made a whole list of the different pronunciations on UGH and why and in different words. But that's an old English word. We used to have a in our language, and we don't anymore. So hence, when my son asked Mom why that GHT or the KNI GHT in night, whoops, and I said, honey, we used to pronounce it knicht. We don't anymore. We've decided how to spell things, and then we changed how we pronounce them. Sorry. So this is where the approach I like to take, though, is to help kids see that, yes, there are some words you can just go. Green means go. There are some you have to slow down and think about the pronunciation, because so many of our letters are what I call foam letters. We're going to talk about those in just a moment. It's how many of them are brick letters where it's only going to represent one thing, and how many of them are flexible, like that O. Is it a like in hopping, or an O like in hoping? Or the long A sound could be spelled in multiple different ways. An AI, an AY, an A consonant E. So there's more than one way of spelling a sound, or a letter may represent more than one sound. Okay, so let's start with the greens. There are very few letters that if you see it, you can only think of one sound. And frankly, my list kept getting smaller and smaller every time I did this. I mean, I've had some food for thought. We'll see if I've updated it since my last time I did this. And there are a few sounds, even fewer than letters, that you can only write in one way. So let's see if you can come up with some of these. And then this will be our last activity before we take a break, because I can tell it's 10:15. You all have been sitting for a long time. So let's see how many we can come up with. Can you think of any letters that if you only represents one sound? Oh, these are only going to be consonants, by the way. All of the vowels represent more than one sound. Nothing's coming into the chat. Let me give you some of them. Let's see, here we go. That's exactly where the one I was going to bring up. I is definitely the B. I cannot think of any sound that the B would make. And the F, I would agree, Tina, with one exception, and that is the word of. It's the only word where F represents V, because it's the unstressed version of off. Now, Anne, I used to have P on my list, but then I thought if you follow it by an H, it no longer represents P, does it?
Right.
The PH together to make F. Let's see what else is coming in. Yes. Now I used to have the D on there as well, but remember we had that ED becomes T. Same thing with the T, Tina. I used to have it on there, but if I follow it by an H, it's no longer T, is it? I think I might have R, Sherry. Let's pull up my list and see. So we've got the F with this asterisk because of. Now, some people will say, well, what about you can have the K could be silent. You're right, but could it ever make a sound other than K? I don't think so. Oh, there's that P. Let's take that off for next time because of PH. Sherry's got the J, and we've got R, V, W, and Z. Although maybe I think I need to put an asterisk on W because some people pronounce the WH more of a than depending on the pronunciation. All right, let's pull up the sounds. The th and the are usually written with a TH. The ah, like in olives, is usually written with an O, and unless it's an A, like in what or was. That's very rare. In numbers, not usage. And then the B, L, P, and V are normally written with the B, L, P, or V. Again, the asterisk with this V in the case of. So not many, but there are a few things that we can hang our kids' hats on. Again, when it comes to things like the vowels where you have more than one sound, let's start with the most consistent and common, and then we'll pull on the more regular. So I do have some teaching tips, but I see people taking notes. Tina, I'll put the asterisk on, which is the other one? Oh, the P I'm getting rid of and putting an asterisk on the W. Otherwise, I think we're good on that. Okay. One teaching tip on this, and before we move into other activities, I'm going to give us a break. So one teaching tip that I cannot stress enough is teaching reading through writing. Notice this quote here, is that the movement we use in writing leaves a motor memory in the sensor motor part of the brain, which helps us recognize the letters. So this is helping us connect the sound, the symbol, the letter, the meaning, all of this together. As I make B, Bob, or D, dogged, I'm really making that connection through the movement. So teaching reading through writing is something I cannot stress enough. All right, we're going to get into the yellow flag words, a few keyword, we could have some more activities, but I want to give us a break now. And then we'll get into some of those other things because you all have been sitting for a long time. So it's now 10:20. I normally do a 15-minute break, but we can do a soft start if we have everyone back at 10:30. So I will put a return time at 10:35 to give us a full 15-minute break. 10:35. If the majority of the group doesn't need that whole time, we can start a little early, but we can do a soft practice start. Okay. All right, I'm pausing and resume recording. Before we get back into the content, I'm sharing some resources. Let me clear off the come back time. So this is one where they could, let's see if I'm going to make you, I don't see a TCH on here. Cab, we'll do it that way. And so this is a manipulative that you could use this way. What I like about this one, I said this one's even better, is because this one is a blending board where you can choose what you want the initial, the medial, or the final sounds and representations. So, you know, this one, watch what happens if I do, let's do dig, now change it to Doug, now change it to dog, now change it to dot. And notice how it's making this list of words here. Make it DOS. That's not a good one. Let's palm, etc. And I can change and add in some initial digraphs. I can add some clusters or blends, if you want to call them blends, clusters, whatever. In the beginning, the middle, or the end, and I can add in some plurals as well. So you can see even some double FLS or Z here. So you choose whatever you want, and then it becomes, you remake it. And this is a great blending board too. So those are all in our resources guide. I'll put those in for you as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So speaking of things and activities, let's do a couple other activities with our green flag words before we jump into the yellow. So let me put that resources in for you. And go back to an activity that I want to do for you. Oh, gonna jump over there. And that is when we're talking about how to, let's see, teaching order, what about letter names? Keywords. Keywords unlock sounds, and they help your kids figure out what sound is represented by that letter. So I'm going to get this link for us. Copy link address. I'm going to also put it in the chat box for you so that you can explore this on your own or share it with others. And let's do this together. I'm going to put it up over here. Doesn't matter where. I'll put it there instead. All right, so let's take a look at these keywords and have a conversation about why you would or wouldn't use some of these keywords. And we'll talk about those real quick. So, can we see it all? I think so. So let's take a moment. And there are 5 here that they have identified as ones that they wouldn't use. And let's have a conversation about ones you would or wouldn't use on here. You can either unmute or put something into the chat. Give you a moment.
Forgive me, which ones are they saying they're not using? Let me maybe I'll go look at it online.
Don't look at the answers yet.
Oh no, I'm trying to figure out which ones they're saying are mistake. Oh, never scratch that.
That's for us to have a conversation. Which one do you think, Tina? You could scroll down and click your answer, but let's find the flaws.
No. But as in which picture I wouldn't use with which word, I guess is what I'm
Yes,
asking.
which keywords are not good. So let me give you an example.
Elephant.
Why not? Why not, Wendy?
Because it sounds like an L instead of an E for E.
I agree with you. That's one that they actually missed, but I agree with you on that. So there are 5 more that are even worse than elephant.
Xylophone.
Giraffe.
Xylophone. Why not xylophone? We've already talked about X making X.
Because that is not the X sound. The X does not have a typical sound as z.
It
That's a
does at the
Z
beginning
sound.
of Greek words, but very, very rare. Very rare. Yes, box and fox are much more useful because that's the more common. Thanks, Sherry. Someone said giraffe. Tell us why.
Because again, it's the j sound, not the g sound.
Well, G makes both, but
Right,
the
but then there's the rule followed by what vowel, right?
exactly, and it's actually followed by what vowel and based on what language origin. We always talk about that E, I, or Y, but we don't talk about the fact that those are French words, which really help to help your kids understand that. And girl, don't follow that E, I, or Y making the J sound. Those are Germanic words. E, I, or Y affecting the G and the C are all French. Just warning you, my internet connection is unstable. Let's cross our fingers. There are three more, I think.
I would guess whale because of the WH.
Oh, I definitely agree on that.
Okay.
Let's not confuse kids yet with that one. Agreed.
How
Two more.
how about ice cream?
Definitely. Why?
Because it's saying I as in ice cream versus the eh.
But versus if, like an inch, or yes, exactly, igloo. Which again, like the G and like the W and like the X, they're common sounds, but not as common as the short yeah. One last one that a lot of people like this one because of its look, but as far as pulling out that first sound is very tricky. Anyone find it?
We,
What do you think?
Would it be queen again with that k? What?
Well, can you think of anything better?
No.
So queen is
I-
queen is pretty common.
I almost want to say umbrella.
Really? Why is that when Carolyn?
I've heard
Umbrella.
because it sounds like a little bit more of like the A at the soft A, like maybe
Interesting.
I don't know.
Yeah,
It's just the way I hear it.
I think it depends on the pronunciation. I think umbrella is very common, but it's not the hardest one here to see and pull out. And I don't like dolphin because of the PH, but if I'm not looking at it, all I'm trying to get at is the D in dolphin. So it's okay. It's there's a harder one to pull off the first sound. If your goal is to get
Snake.
your kids.
Snake.
What was that?
Snake.
Snake.
Exactly, Lauren, because you're pulling that s off of the and you're having to separate that blend. So definitely snake would be the other one. But what an interesting exercise of what is a good keyword here. So you'll see those are the ones that they chose. I'll take off my things here, and they don't care about the E. Is it cat? Cat is another one. No, cat is okay. It's cake. Cake is the one that I Slingerland used to use, and they've changed it to cup because you hear the letter K in cake like you hear the letter L in elephant. So trying to find things that are clear, I think, is a really useful exercise for us to make sure that what we're doing is clear and easy and then consistent for our kids as well. So that was a exercise on keywords, how they are very helpful. However, be careful. Consistency is really key on that. As someone had mentioned, the ox was useful. So they do help for you to figure out what was the sound that you hear in that. And actually for some of the short vowels, I've heard people moving more toward the medial rather than the initial. So if you have like ha, hot, or even using continuants like man, because you hear the ah sound in those continuants are easier for blending. Because that's actually the next question is when we're talking about what teaching order, there are some who say, let's start with, and that's not clicking. There we go. Let's start with ones with the sound is in the initial parts of their name. So like B, D, you hear the B at the beginning of B and you hear D at the beginning of D. So these letters have their sound at the beginning of their name versus those where the sound is second, like F, L, M, N. This is in the names. And then these where, and I notice I'm not even doing the vowels because that's multiple sounds. Those where the sound isn't in the name at all, or of course, the complexity of the syllables is another piece that to talk about. Though, when we think about order for blending, think about the continuant sounds. Those are easier for kids to blend together, man, or pull apart because they're stretching it, or in versus the stops. Whoops, for some reason I don't have those animated there. You have your short vowels are always going to be their easier ones to start with. And then your stop sounds are harder for blending, for your blenders. And then your combiners, your ch and j are harder as well. So thinking about on those greens, start with what's easier, move to what's more difficult. And the same thing with when you talk about letters that have their names in them or not. Okay, we're going to get into now the yellow ones because this is really key. And this is where our kids with dyslexia really struggle the most, is with the yellow flag words, because they have to slow down and think about which way to spell it. And it adds that additional memory piece to, is it an EA or is it an EE? And it's not just a sound symbol correspondence. Greens are a lot easier for them because they can just go. This takes an additional layer and additional memory piece. So when I have the yellow flag words, those are words that can be spelled in more than one way. These are very often of Anglo-Saxon origin, meaning the old English words, particularly if you have your vowel teams or your vowel digraphs. So you'll notice that this, we can use spelling to provide clues to meaning. Look at the EA in heel and the EA in heel. The EE in heel, notice we can connect the first one to health. We can connect the second one to feet. But the sound placement can dictate what choice. So for example, the f, if it is after a s, it's not going to be an SF. We just don't do that because we've never had SF in our old practices, old English. The s, it's going to be PH like in sphere, and it's a Greek influence. So hence that knowing the word origin can guide your choices as well. So the handout I'm going to share with you on this, on yellow flag words, it comes initially from when I was teaching at Chartwell, and it was based on Slingerland's resources. Here we go, our structured literacy things. We're going to go back to the ADA compliant handouts. And the handout I want to give to you on this is called Keywords for Yellow Cards. And I can show you the yellow cards. I do have it here. Whoops, not the right click. Let me go on to the next one. Is Keywords for Yellow Cards. Here we go. And these are the words that I used for my kids to help prompt them. Let me make this a little bigger for you, about the multiple spellings of different sounds. So I'll just give you a moment to look at that while I get the cards. So you recall that last time on Monday, we actually might not have shared this on Monday. So I think that was a different group. So as I'm using individual cards, if they only know one sound, I'm going to help give them a prompt and say that C represents K, and K represents K, and B represents B, etc. But then when I know more than one sound for that, I'm going to get out my yellow cards because I'm going to say, okay, what are all the ways you know of representing K? My students will say C, like cup, K like in kit or kite, CK at the end of a word right after a short vowel, like in Jack, CH maybe they've learned like in chorus, and you'll notice I don't even have QUE on here. Oops, let me get to my consonants down here. Here are my consonant sounds, the K that I'm going through right now. I have a card for each of these, and I practice what are the ways you know to make eh. E like an elephant, or what's another better, like an echo. EA like in head. Those are the different spellings for that S sound. So I have these both in vowels and I have them in consonants for them to recognize and think about. Notice the order too. I have the most common coming before the less common. So look, you see for the for example, has a nest or a knife or a gnat. These, notice, see, is this a surprise to anyone that the most common Z is actually an S, not a Z? Like in nose and boys, you're going to use that a lot more often. It's not going to represent Z at the beginning of a word like Z would or X, but at the middle or the end, it's more often going to be an S than a Z. So these are some keywords to help our kids. But yes, you can see there's some complexity here. And this is where we need to have some conversations of why do you use one versus the other? I missed an example for you that I like to share. When we talk about sound placement dictating choices, you may have heard George Bernard Shaw say that English is crazy. You can spell fish, G-H-O-T-I. He uses the example GH from enough, the O from women, and the TI from nation. Well, I disagree. I say that's not true because the GH will not say G, will not say F at the beginning. It will say G like in ghost. And the O will not represent an I in the middle of a single syllable word. And the TI needs the ON after it to make sh. Definitely a TI at the end will not be like that. So he's wrong. You can't spell goat that, fish that way. I have a couple other examples here of sound spelling influences, and I'm clicking a couple times. Here we go. I'll bring it all up for us to look at because we've talked about some of these already. Sphere, I mentioned. The played, we need that meaning. Here are some language of origin examples. Charade, does anybody know what language? I think we've already talked about that one a little bit. Charade being from, Tina's typing it in. There we go, good, you're not muted. Spaghetti from Italian, obviously, and mosquito being from Spanish. So again, etymology really helps and understand those spellings. With the position of the sound, where it is, there's a lot of complexity here. And when I teach them to kids, I want to think about some of the orthographic conventions. So this is a point where I've been talking a bit, and I want you to have an opportunity to talk to each other. So I'm going to give you 2 tasks, and I'm going to give you a little bit longer to talk about this. No, we'll do this together, and then I'll give you the task, because this could be a little bit tricky. We've already talked about the soft C and soft G, that when C and G are followed by E, I, or Y, like in scent and cinch and gym, it makes that S or a J instead of K or G. And those are all French influenced words, unless of course they've been anglicized, etc. Even, for example, my own name, Alicia in Latin, Alicia in more Americanized or anglicized versions. It depends on how we pronounce things. So the digraphs and trigraphs, we've talked about that these are common connections. And one of the things that, remember I said the H, it depends on if it's followed by whatever. One thing to keep in mind when I teach these is 2 letters that make one sound. Notice I have some of these in blue though. There are some clues that we can help with our kids. One, we can help them know when to use WR instead of an R. And one thing I didn't note is that these 2 come only at the beginnings of words. These 3 come only at the ends. There are some that come at the beginning, for example, KN only at the beginning. GN only at the beginning, unless it's, well, that's not a digraph. So we'll look at GN, we won't say any only at the beginning, but some come only at the beginning, some can be anywhere, some can only come at the end. Those are patterns that some kids pick up regularly. Some kids, particularly those with dyslexia, they need us to help them with this. So recognize that some of these come only at the beginning. Does anybody know the clue on WR that you can help our students with? WH I already helped you with, it's question words, which that one's easy. But the WR, and then the WH has some older English words like the whale, and is it whale with the W or WH? Good question. Let's look at one up. But WR, we could give them a hint. Does anyone know what that is? We talked about it a little bit when we were looking at wrench earlier, or wrist. I can't remember which word we had, or wrestle. But think about those words. Think about words that start with WR. What do they all have in common?
Are
Is
they
there
R
movement?
controlled?
The R usually controls the vowel. What were you saying, Tina?
Are they somehow linked into movement words or some type of movement words?
Let's get a little more specific on that movement. What
Short
does your
pole?
wrist, what does your wrist do? What does it do when you write? And when you wrestle or you rap?
Does it round? Well, no.
You're right. It has to do with twisting. Even when you wring out the towel and you, let me think of others, wrestling, even if you're wrong, you have a twisted idea. Even a wren flies in a twisted motion. They all have to do with twisting in some way. So that's one clue you can help with your WRs. WR isn't all that common. Use R unless it has to do with something with twisting. And then we're going to use WR. How about those other three? CK, TCH, DGE. I kind of gave them away earlier, but let's see if someone remembers. Those three are used at the end of a word, right after.
Short vowel.
There we go. Wendy's got it. And I do have a little activity maybe on here. We'll see for, we do, for when your kids say or prove it. All right, so let's get into the next bullet here, that interesting E. I want my kids to always think about the fact that there's a reason for the E. When I taught high schoolers, I'd have kids write, let's have the word time, and he'd write his E really kind of little down here. And I'd say, what is that? He said, well, if there's supposed to be an E there, it is. If not, it's decoration. So I'm saying there, no decorative E's. There's always a reason for it. It may not be always a good reason, but there's a reason. Let's talk about it. So I've given you two different reasons here. There are a couple that one is actually explained a little bit further here. But can anybody help us with why would I use that E in these? This one I gave away down here. Why is that E there in curse and moose and mouse? And if you teach middle schoolers, you don't want to use the word horse. Why is that E there? What happens if you take the E off? We have a base word that ends in an S, right?
Right. If you take the E off, it changes that S sound, doesn't it?
Yes.
Does it change the accent of the word?
Well, what do we use S's for, Sherry?
Curs. So it becomes, instead of curse, it would become curs.
More than one cur, right?
Yeah.
More than one
Absolutely.
moo, or what a cow does.
Moose. It becomes moose. And it would become mouse.
But when we look at it, it's more than one of things, or what a cow does.
Right. So it changes, so the S would indicate a plural when it's not a plural.
Exactly. So you could have more than one cur, which isn't a thing, but within that either, it's more than one curse. Sometimes, I mean, the word is a curse now. It's a thing. It's changing it from a plural of something to a singular. So house is another example. And when my daughter would do this early on, she was learning to write, and she got the ow, and then she put an S, and I said, okay, but is it more than one how? She said, no. I said, okay, what letter can you add that's not going to add a sound, so they can look like it's not more than one how? So she could add the E to help her remember that. It's simply to help us know that it's not more than one of something. It is its own unit. So that E became a useful additional letter we can add that's not going to add an additional sound. That's what we did here with have. It's not have. It's not an A consonant E. It's not making a long A sound. It is simply like we have live and live, because we need that E, because originally when our language was first written, that V, A, U, J, I, well, they became hard to read. So because now that we have printing, it doesn't matter, but when it was just written by hand, it was hard to read. So we added the E there to help clarify those. That's why when you have, for example, blue has the UE, even though we don't need it, flu has that E. Anytime things end in that V or J or I have an asterisk there because I think there is an explanation like taxi. It's much more recent. There is also an example of I could put an asterisk here, rev, short for revolutions, but in general, you don't have those at the end. Thank you. Okay. Some silent letters. When can we hear those in related words? Can you think of an example of one of those words where you hear that letter pronounced? Want to have any examples for us?
Are you meaning like with sign, with signature? You have the
Yes,
G and the N?
exactly. That's
Okay.
exactly. Can you think of some others? Signal. That GN is very tricky when you look at lots of related words that resign or resignation.
Bombard.
Bombastic, bombard, hymnal, autumnal. So you can help your kids see those clues when you add in affixes, when you show related words. So autumn is a hard one to remember, that N, but if you think, well, I need the N for autumnal, then you can help them remember that there's a silent N at the end there. And then lastly, in some of these is the buzz off Miss Pill with a floss rule. If you have a word that ends in f, o, s, or z, you're going to have that double FLS or Z. And again, I say usually because there are a few exceptions, but many of them, for example, bus is short for autobus. Or trying to think of some others that gas is short for gasoline. So there are not many that violate that, but it's especially in the older English words. So you see here, buzz off Miss Pill are examples of words that follow that floss rule. Okay. I want to give you a chance to talk about those in practice, but let me give you an exploring first. Go through this spelling sort, and then we'll give you a chance to practice some of these together. Okay, so remember I said you have your kids who say, I don't believe you on that. Actually, on some of those digraphs and trigraphs, particularly these three. This is an illustration that I used to use with my kids. I had this on my wall, and I actually had the ones, and I have one poster for each of these digraphs. And the TCH, the CK, and the DGE, I put a blue border around because those are the ones that we said just a moment ago. They come at the end of a word right after a short vowel. And when my kids practice them with their cards, if I pull out the TCH cards, there's the GKN, THWR. Of course, I find all the other ones. There's the TH. Here's one. The CK, they would practice it. CK, Jack comes at the end of a word right after a short vowel. That verbiage needs to be what they're used to, because when they're thinking about the CK, it comes at the end of a word right after a short vowel. When they're writing a word that has k at the end of a word right after a short vowel, they're going to put the CK. Now, for your kids who say, wait a minute, I'm not sure I'm going to believe you on that, you can have them sort words. So this is what I used to do in person. I would actually have the participants sort them. And you'll notice that these all have the ch sound at the end. These all have j at the end. And then they look at the patterns. And I'm going to see if there's anybody who would like to help me see why we use TCH versus CH at the same time, or DGE versus GE. So take a look at these. Is there someone who'd like to talk it through and use these to help us see why TCH and DGE come at the end of a word right after a short vowel? Somebody want to talk that through? You all are quieter today than yesterday. I mean, Monday.
Okay, I'm guessing because this is not my forte, but I'm thinking the vowel change, like crutch would become crudge almost. I mean, it would change the the vowel sound.
Yeah, this is notice how these are all short vowels? Say these, Lisa. So crutch, pitch, match,
Match, fetch,
fetch,
patch, botch.
match. So in all of these, that TCH is right after that short vowel, isn't it?
Mhm.
But okay, let's try these. Is this short?
Where I'm not sure where you are.
Oh, on ouch. Sorry, ouch.
Ouch.
Is out short or long?
It's short. Am I right?
Mm.
I have no idea.
Ow, we're going to consider that a longer sound. It's a
Okay.
not an it's not one of my five shorts. So let's consider that a long one. Notice we have the CH. Just like the E in speech, I have a
is
CH,
long.
or the ow in here I have a CH.
Right.
And look at these other ones. I have a short vowel, but I have a consonant here.
Yeah.
I have a short vowel and a consonant, and I have a short vowel and a consonant. So each time there's a consonant or a long vowel before the ch, I'm going to use the CH. Each time I look at just a short vowel before the ch, I'm going to use the TCH. The Y isn't as important as the fact that they're seeing this pattern and it follows every time. Does that make sense, Lisa?
Yes.
Same thing over here. These are all short vowels just before j. And over here, we have a long vowel, huge. We have a consonant before the j. We have a long vowel. We have a consonant before the j, consonant before the j, and a consonant before the j. So helping your kids see that, yes, this pattern does fit. You'll show them lots of words where it fits the pattern. You have a short vowel before the DGE, a short vowel before the TCH. Okay, I have a practice for you in the Jamboard. I'm going to show you what this practice is and give you a little bit of time to kind of talk about these kinds of words and this practice. Probably not as long as last time. Maybe it was 7 minutes might be okay. So in the Jamboard, you'll see exactly, someone's already jumped to it. It's all about statistics. I want you to think about which of these are not allowable and why. And we'll have that conversation when you come back, as well as what do we do with these kind of yellow flag words? You can also jump to and talk about these different ways of making these sounds. Is this a new concept for you? Can you think about how to do this slowly with your kids so that we're not overwhelming them? I knew one program that said they taught all of the long O at once. And I thought, oh my gosh, some kids, they can handle that. Other kids, no, I want you just to start with one at a time, and then we're going to build up to it. So I'm going to pause the recording, make our breakout rooms. All right, who would like to start?
Well, I think we decided that fret, skagful, and redrepment were the only ones I think that were okay.
Let's see. I'll do a green for okay. You said fret. Why isn't that writing? I don't know why that is bizarre. That's not writing on that. I'll have to use my annotation. All right, well, still good green. So you said fret. Which one?
Skagful.
Skagful.
And then redrepment.
Redrepment. I see one more.
And steck.
Grok.
Steck is okay. Grok, I would say not. Who can talk about why is Grok not okay?
I
What's
think we said because the K, it only comes at the end after a long vowel sound.
Or an L, like you need a L or a N. We need the CK at the end of a word right after a short vowel, don't we?
Right, got it.
So it was wrong with flet.
The double Fs
Comes where, Tina?
at the end.
So here's another truism. We write with as many letters as we need to, as few as we can. We don't need that double F before the L. We only needed one single one. At the end of a word, right after a short vowel, we do, because perhaps there was some reason initially. And also one thing I think it's really helpful to think about is the difference between of and off. Notice that double F really gives us some more power or a different stress than a single. All right, when do we use NG? Definitely not at the beginning, huh? One group I'd stopped in and talked to, they said, well, it's hard to pronounce. Get we just can't do that. What's wrong with this one?
Which one's that?
That this
Double E again.
this double E, we don't need the CK. All we need is just a K. How about this one? This one to me, it would be okay. So I'm actually going to take off the red on this one. Anybody have a chance to talk about this one? Say why it would be okay or not okay.
My guess was the G with the gentle Cindy rule.
You mean, is that what you're calling a soft C, soft G? I like that, gentle Cindy.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's totally fine. I mean, if it were a short E, we would need the DGE, which is why this
Right,
one's not
right.
okay.
Right.
Because it's long, that GE is fine. So I'll say the DGE here doesn't work after this long O, but this one works just fine. How about this one? Anybody talk about why it's an OY, not why that doesn't work?
So looking at Scrooge, though, wouldn't that be like the Three Stooges? Isn't that an OO? Stooge?
Yes. But do they have a D in that? A stooge? You know what? That's a really interesting point. It should be a because it's long, we have to consider that long. Ooh, it should be a GE and not a DGE. But if it's a
They
proper,
spell it
it's a-
STOOGES.
there is no D.
No D.
Thanks, Tina. I was going to say, if there were a D, people do things with proper nouns all the time.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. All right, so asteroid, we don't have a Y in the middle. Remember, we might have talked about this on Monday, but the Y and the I are interchangeable letters. If it's in the beginning or middle, it'll be the I. If it's at the end, it'll be the Y. And when I say they're interchangeable, I really mean it. The I can also make Y, like in million or billion or onion. So if it's at the beginning or middle, it's the I, and if it's the end, it's the Y of a syllable. Okay, what's wrong with this one? This will become important when we talk about morphology. What don't we do in the middle of a word?
Double vowel?
Double I specifically. We can have double anything else, except for A's. We don't do double A's. Not typically. We used to, but we don't really anymore. Double I specifically. We can have double E, double O. We can't have double U. But double I, definitely not. This is why when we learn the Y rule, whether we're not to change the Y to I, we have to keep it if we're going to add on a suffix that begins with an I, because we don't have those two I's together. The only exception would be like taxiing or skiing, and skiing is a Norse word and taxiing is a really new word. All right, what's last one? What's wrong with this one? Any thoughts?
PCH?
No, the CH is fine because it's after a long vowel. It would be
It's the
cute.
SK, right?
PCH, though, wouldn't it be PCH?
Jerry's got it. It's that SKR. Before an R, we do SCR. So SCREACH. Screech. So complicated, isn't it? How do we pick up these things? Some kids
Why do we never do a K after the S like that? Is it a German thing?
we actually do a K after an S in Norse words, but we don't do an R after it. It's the SKR that's the problem here.
Yeah. Okay.
SK like skin and skirt and skeen.
Sure, but the SKR is the SCR a German thing?
It's an Old English, yes.
Old English, okay.
It's Old English is Germanic. And when my kids say why, I'm going to say, okay, let's go to Edam Online and look up the origin of the word. And actually, even more to look at the patterns, I'm going to go to onelook.com. And I'm going to look up an SKR and see what comes up as a letter string. And let's see if any of these are really real words. Let's look at commonness and common words. Yeah, those aren't real words. Scrimmage. Okay, that's pretty recent. Those aren't real words. What? I mean, scrimmage is, I wonder how recent that is. Let's look for, it doesn't even have a word history one. So we just don't do SKR in our language. As I said, with the SK would be, for example, the SKIN. SK usually comes from the Old Norse. When the Norwegians invaded, think of the Norwegians with the and the Vikings, they brought the SK into our language. Or you say skin, you say some of the other, let's see, skirt, etc. These are Old Norse coming from the Viking invasion, the SK. But SKR, not finding them. Just don't do it in our language. SCR, yes. We'll find a whole bunch of those. Again, I'm looking at common words and I'm looking at most common. And we've got a whole bunch of SCRs, but not the SKR. We just don't do that. And again, then that question becomes, how do we learn this? That this is just something we don't do. This is something that a good reader picks up through lots of reading and writing. Some of our kids are going to have to recognize, when I'm teaching them, start with a C unless you have a reason not to. And C is the older ones. We're just going to start with a C unless it's followed by EI or Y. In that case, we're going to change it to a K. And then when they say, what about skin? That's an old Norse word. So we have to have a reason not to do a C. Language it's very complex, isn't it? Lauren, I see you doing this because there's some complexities. I'll put these links into the chat box. Like, again, I love these resources. OneLook is one of my favorite searches because I can look on letter strings. And then what Edam Online is for the history. That's for your etymology to understand what is the origin of that word. And I don't have all the answers, but that's what I want my kids to recognize, is that it's okay to not have answers, but let's be curious. Let's figure out, why is it spelled that way? When my son said, Mom, that EAU in beauty. I said, well, let's look it up. Sure enough, it's Old French. So, because anytime you have lots of letters you don't pronounce, you're looking at a French word. And we have to understand that we have a lot of etymological influences. In fact, I have a handout for you in the ADA compliance that is all etymological layers to look at. Hopefully I clicked it. I'll click and open. Old English being made up of Old Anglo-Saxon and Old French influences. And there's that Arabic and the Norse, SK, like skin and ski. Make this a little bigger for you so you can see this. But look at all the difficulties with French. French is a hard language to read and write. And look at all of the difficult parts of our language that come from French. That I making the E sound, like in chic, elite, marine, machine, limousine. The sh, CH making sh. The QU being antique and critique. The the ooh, the bureau, and the oys, and the matinee, and the jus, damage, and collage, and soup. These are all French words. You can see some of these old Anglo-Saxon. They're really easy for kids to know the meaning of these words. They're not so easy for spelling. Look at the mouse and mice and child and children. All those old English, here's our silent letter patterns, KN, WR, OUGH, IGH. Those letters used to be pronounced, but they're not anymore. That CLH syllable type came in when the French came in. And then we see Latin and Greek, which are a lot more regular. For dyslexic, yeah, the French, interesting. I'd be curious on that. Mosquito, oh, it was where do I have mosquito? I'll need to fix that one. Thank you. You know what? That's a really good question. Let's look it up, because I did say earlier it was Spanish. And I think I have it on the wrong place on that. Yes, it is from the Spanish mosquito, Old English, the Latin. They both are Latin based. So the pronunciation may have to do with a French influence, but they're both Latin based. So they're very similar on that. Thank you, Carolyn, for that. I'll have to fix. Okay. So this is where I say we have to slow down and think about all this, because there's a lot going on here, but there are some that are just really, really, really odd. We call these the really rare patterns. And I call these red flag words, and I'm just waiting for my thing to move. I have an example of a kid who approached one of my speech and language pathologist friends and said, okay, I know that E says and I says it, and G says good, and H says and T says t. So what's this a gut? Those poor kids, right? This is where we need to, again, through remember the orthographic mapping, analyze and help the kids recognize this is the pronunciation of A. Maybe even I taught you that IGH represents I, like in night and fight and bright. But you know what, folks? When you precede it by an E, it becomes A, like in eight and sleigh and way and neighbor. Not very often, but regularly. So this becomes that predictability. Yes, EIGH is weird when you stick them together, but EIGH is going to make the A sound like in sleigh and neighbor and way. So again, we're just going to connect the sounds and the symbols and help them see that we have two sounds in 8, A and T. And how do we spell the A? In this case, it's EIGH. And how do we spell it? T? They get used to that pretty easily. But what's the best way to teach these is through relationships. So remember I said that Louisa Moats and I disagree with some of these. She said is very irregular. And if you think about the sound symbol connections, yes. But if you think about morphology and relationships, it's not as irregular when you look at this pattern. Pay becoming paid, lay becoming laid, say becoming, maybe it used to be pronounced said, but now it's said. It's easier for us to now to pronounce. Paid, no problem. Ped, no, that wouldn't work. So we've again changed pronunciation after we changed the spelling. And then you could argue, well, what about stay? Well, the ED is a much more recent introduction and a lot easier for us with the ED. So sometimes we have to look at other relationships. We do that as well with the horrible done. People hate the word done. I'm sorry, not done, does. They hate spelling does because that OES. Well, let's help them see it goes the same thing as goes. Go, goes, gone, going. Notice those same suffixes, ES and E and ING. We do the same thing with do. Go and do, we can follow that same pattern. They have no problem with goes, right? So why not does? Because of the pronunciation. Okay. And then we can also see some relatives here. The L in would, we see it in its relationship with will. The L in should, we see it in its relationship with shall. And then kids say, well, wait a minute, could, there's no L in can. You're right. But this is where we spell by analogy. We already had would and should in our language. Could rhymes with them, so we're going to spell it the same way. Sometimes I say to my kids, how would you spell it? We do the best we can. Here are some other relationships. The CH and teach, connecting the GH and taught, catch and caught. Look for those relationships in as much as possible, because our morphological knowledge allows us to judge when words are related in meaning, even when they're pronounced differently. Think about wild and wilderness, judge and judicial, predict and predicate. Number, numerous. That B comes from the French, of course. So look for relationships as much as possible. So some tips. We need to make sure it's that orthographic mapping. We are teaching spelling. Again, as I've said many times, teaching reading through writing. It's this interactive back and forth between letters and sounds. We need to segment the words, the sounds of words, and connect them to their symbols. And we need to follow that same process regardless of transparency. Remember when we had this earlier on, looking at how do we spell those sounds? How do we spell the S? How do we spell the T? How do we spell the I? Okay, a few more teaching tips in general when we're talking about sound symbol connections. Number one, we want to provide multiple interactions. I used to have the word multiple exposures, but I changed it to interactions because it's really the interaction with the letters and the sounds that helps solidify these for kids. When I say multiple, I wanted to ask you how many you think will be sufficient in order to really solidify the connection between this letter and the sound it represents, or any letter and the sound it represents. How many times does a student need to interact with it to really solidify it and remember it? Yeah, you guys are getting, yep, it could be dozens or even hundreds, depending on the kid. So depending on the word, the connection, how often they use it, it's at least dozens. So those of you who have gotten more than 10, you've got it. Let's contrast that to once a child knows their sound symbol connections and they're able to decode the word, how many interactions do you think it takes for them to remember and learn a word? So not sound symbols anymore, but an individual word. Now remember, they already know those sound symbol connections. Now they are looking at the word, sounding it out, and learning that individual word. How many connections do you think they need for interactions? One to 4. Look how much easier it is to learn a word than it is the connections between sounds and symbols. I hope that helps us all realize the importance and how much time we need to spend on sound symbol connection. Because by multiple interactions here, we are meaning dozens, if not hundreds, to really solidify it for some of our students. Does it depend on their learning style? So, well, actually, learning styles are not well researched, Anne. The reality, it depends on many factors on how their brains are wired. It depends on whether or not they have dyslexia in their family or any other learning disability. It depends on how robust those interactions, what they're working with. And frankly, it depends on where you are on that continuum. I remember last time when we talked about the rainbow. For people who weren't here, I can go and grab it for us. But it depends on how long it takes for you to get from one stage to the other. And so by the rainbow, I mean, not the simple view of reading where we were talking about the, I think, oh, no. Nope, it wasn't on that one. This one, I think. Yep, the ladder of reading. This really influences how long it's going to take us to develop those sound symbol connections. And another factor is whether or not there's any ADHD going on. Because the part of the brain that we use to connect letters and their sounds, which is a process called paired associative learning, happens in the prefrontal lobe of the brain. So when we talked about the brain a little bit on Monday, we talked about reading, really effective reading happens on the left-hand side. But the connections between sounds and symbols happens in the prefrontal lobe and may take longer for some of our kids because of that. So it really takes concentration. It takes work to really to solidify those connections, to do the orthographic mapping part. Okay. I think we're going to have time to get a little bit into our, we did all that. We're doing pretty well with this. Talked about all this. We're doing really well. So I think we have time to get into morphology today, but I do want to give you a moment to consolidate your thinking and learning about sound symbol correspondences before we move on. So I'm going to give you a moment to go into your breakout rooms one more time for this topic and to kind of think about a keyword or phrase about sound symbol connections and the Jamboard, or kind of process it orally or quietly, whichever is your choice. Because there was a lot that we talked about in sound symbol correspondences. So I'm going to put that Jamboard in there for you again. And I want you to think about what's a key takeaway from sound symbol correspondences. There's a reflection page on your Jamboard. And it is right after that section. It is, hopefully, yes, there's a reflection place. I just want you to take a moment. What is a key takeaway, a word or a phrase or an important idea about making sound symbol connections that you want to take with you? And then we'll get into be able to jump into the morphology before the end of the day today. So I'm going to pause the recording. I'm resuming recording. Who would like to start sharing? I'll put that prompt back up for us. I know it's August and we've had a long day. We're not.
I think our group was talking and we were just, I mean, I was trying to look at it from a perspective of how many rules can we pull out that she's taught us today. But I think in talking about it, I mean, you know, they all come at different times throughout the session. And so somebody said, well, I think what we're supposed to look for are just patterns and tell our kids to look for patterns so they can then discover the patterns and then they internalize the pattern that they've discovered and learned.
So it's funny because yes, I advocate for explicit teaching, but yes, I'm helping them recognize the patterns. Some of our kids recognize them without us and some of them don't. And they're going to need our help getting there. And it's all about patterns. It's all about statistics. So thank you, Anne. How about another group? So you're right, Anne, there's a lot and it's very complex, but the more we can break it down for our students, there is one thing I can share with you. As I mentioned that I have a book in progress, and one of the first pieces that I'm trying to do is to help with this exact piece, is that recognition of the sound symbol correspondences. So I've started with looking at, excuse me, oh, here it is, dyslexia book. Knowledge of orthographic conventions. I've started with looking at this phonics, how letters represent sounds and how sounds are represented in print. And one of the key things I want us to start with is the regularities. So you can see, I'd be happy to share this, but you'll have to know this is a work in progress. But that when we're teaching it, let's start with those single graphemes. Let's start with the continuants because they're easier to blend. And this group will understand what I mean by the yellow and the green. Here is the greens are your inflexible letters. There's only one way, like F only represents F, whereas the yellows are the flexible ones. And then we move on to, and we have lots of explanations here, our digraphs and trigraphs. Notice we have some that are at the beginning or the middle of syllables. Some are at the ends of syllables. Excuse me. Remember that GN we don't have at the beginning. And then we move into our vowel digraphs. Those are split digraphs. We often, in a moment when we learn about syllables, we often call that a vowel consonant a syllable type. We have also vowel digraphs. People often call those vowel teams. And then we move on to the soft C and soft G. We move into some conditional ending graphemes, and we get into some compound symbol connections. Again, how do we teach this in a way that starts with what's easy and builds to what's harder? So I'm happy to put that into the chat box for you. Oh, I love that Carolyn, you're talking about using ASL can help with that as well. So thank you for that, Carolyn. I was wondering, it's because I teach the reading through writing, so that definitely helping us understand the articulatory gestures, the gestures that we use for writing, and that meaning that I'm seeing this triangle. If there's anybody else who would like to add before we move on to syllabification, I'm definitely open for that and would love to hear some things that you talked about. And I'll put this in the chat box for you.
Thank you for that little review.
You're welcome, Anne. A couple other things that I added onto our resources here is that I've added a place for the recordings from this series. So you can either go to recordings from other times when I did it, but this time I'm putting them here. I will say that right now the recordings are from Zoom. They only last for 30 days. Once I get them converted to YouTube, they last for a year. So August series recordings, we can jump down to that. And this link will take you to all the other classes. Remember, I said I'll do this again in September, October, and November. I'll do it again in January, and those will be after school opportunities. So if you follow this link, it will take you to the flyer, hopefully. I'm just checking to make sure it works. Yes, it is. These are all of this year's 23-24 school year and all the other classes. So here's well, I'll be doing this series again, 2-hour chunks, and then full day chunks start in October. I also added on, if you prefer, asynchronous learning opportunities. There's a link to the structured literacy bundle. There's a link to webinars. There are links to lots of other opportunities, kid-friendly books on dyslexia. I mean, there's lots of stuff in here for you to explore. But when I spoke earlier that that's having time to jump into morphology, I misspoke. It was actually the syllabification. You can see that it's the next topic here. So I'm going to pull up that outline again, just to give us that overview of where we're going and jump us in a little bit on syllables, and we can finish those up next week. And there we go, jumping us. They're available to everyone, Wendy. I've had paras, I've had teachers, they're freely available for everyone, as are the asynchronous courses that are available through Glean. They're all free, available to anyone who wants to take them. In fact, speaking of the asynchronous ones by Glean, I do want to point out that there is one of them that says for school psychologists. It's really for anybody who wants to. I mean, they're all the courses are open for everyone. This one is only a 2-hour introduction to dyslexia, to dysgraphia. This one where it says students serving students with dyslexia for school psychologists. It's just going deeper into helping kids with dyslexia. So anyone can take it, and that would be probably a good one to recommend for you because you're a special education teacher. These are all open to anybody who wants to use them, and they are free and asynchronous, so you can do them on your own time. I'll put that in the chat box for you too, so you don't have to go digging for it. All right. So I have a fun way to start us off on syllables. I want to make sure that everybody has all the resources that you need. And let's jump into, as I call it, a fun way to start. I think I am sharing with sound. So let me make sure of that, because you've got to hear this because it's just a fun. If you've never seen these, I think her name is, oh, I have the link. I'll be able to send it in for you. They're also on our discussion doc. Here's the link of this one.
I just broke too close. Syllables, vowel sound was short when they were closed, and now I am about to know about open syllables. When there's just one consonant in 2 vowels, then it is different. First vowel, and then you make the split and open syllable. Now it's open, like in the word broken, and bacon and unspoken, even the word COVID. It's a long vowel and it makes the long sound, like in robot and rebound. First vowel is a long vowel, cause it's open.
Duh.
So a silly way to start off and thinking about syllables. She has a whole bunch more. I have several of them linked in our structured literacy. She's also one of the people that I follow on YouTube. Let's see, but going under sound symbol correspondences. Oh, syllabification. That's where we're going to this one. Open syllables. This is the one we just watched. There's one in Consonant Ellie. That's a lot of fun. They did those, she and her husband did this as a team in during COVID shutdown, and they have just got really cute. Here's the magic E. So definitely a first syllable division, that's by them as well. So lots of, is this by them too? Yes, vowel team. So you have lots of fun with exploring some of these. But I do have a warm up for us to do when we're talking about syllabification. This is a find the syllables. So let me get it over there. Whoops. No, don't go too far. Here we go. Oops. All right. So question for you. How many multisyllabic words do you notice or can you find in this small paragraph? What do you notice about them? And how many different kinds of syllables do you think there are? Give you a moment. You can underline, you can put them in the chat, or count them first and come up with a number. I just realized I was talking to you and you didn't, I was muted. So the question is, how many multisyllabic words do you see here? I will say there are some that tripped me up the first time I did this. How many do you see? 23. Let's see, Tina. Maybe come up with a different number? So I will say, Tina, that my number was much higher initially. So I'm going to show you what I finally came to. And we'll talk about why some of these that you may have underlined or thought, for example, this one looks multisyllabic, doesn't it? But say it. Striped. Is that ED adding another syllable? It doesn't. It just adds on another consonant, doesn't it? Some people went way higher than you. Let's continue. I think there are only about 12 here. So 1, multisyllabic words, 2, 3, 4, 5. We talked about how striped is not. And stared, stared. That ED is not an additional syllable, is it? So into, I lost count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. How about I underline some tricky ones that made us think that they were multisyllabic? Because we always say when there are more than one vowel, that we have another syllable, right? However, when you say these, I challenge you to actually try them and then think to yourself, is it really multisyllabic? Caused, scarred, striped, scared, slopped, sloped, liked. Tricky, isn't it? You have to say them to realize those are actually single syllable words. So this is where, when we're talking about syllabification, we have to think about the relationship between speech and print again, and that relationship with morphology. That suffix ed is going to confuse us a little bit because sometimes ed adds on a suffix, a syllable. I don't have an example here. Let's think about like planted is an example of a 2-syllable word. Planted, I have 2 syllables. Or if I have, and I think that's, after a T sound, that ed is going to make it an ed. But other times, very often, caused or striped, it makes a t sound or it makes a d sound. It's not always making an additional syllable. So jumping into what is a syllable. How do you find your syllables? I think it was Wendy, you talked about earlier when your chin drops. That is a very common way of finding those syllables, is when your chin drops. Another one, I put the duck on for duck lips. This comes from William Van Cleve. And so when your mouth is going out wider, it's for your vowel sounds. That's where you have the additional syllables. If I think of, for example, what was one we had? Stranded. Stranded. Notice my lips are going up additional. Now, a lot of people like to clap syllables. A warning with that is if you're clapping your syllables, sometimes your kids can get confused on how many things you've actually clapped. So if I said helicopter, helicopter, how many syllables? I don't know. I was clapping them. So let's use our body in different ways. Helicopter. I touch my hands, my elbow, my shoulder, my head. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 syllables. I've known other people to say alligator, alligator. Now let's count them. Alligator. Or better yet, if we're going to write them, let's draw a dash for each one. Alligator. And so I make sure that then I'm going to write something in each one to pay attention. Then what's the vowel sound? A and al, gay, and then tor. To help really enunciate each of those syllables. Because one of the things that I need to stress too is that in English, not every syllable is stressed in the same way. Remember earlier when we talked about some of the difficulties, one of them is schwa. Schwa is difficult because we don't pronounce every syllable in the same way. Our English is what's called a stress-timed language, not a syllabic-timed language. We stress different syllables depending on the importance. This is also why some of our smaller words like articles and even endings, suffixes, get left off by a lot of our kids with dyslexia because they don't have the stress. Say I'm going to the store, they'll leave off the I am or the going, we're stressing the important syllables. So toward that end, I'm going to ask you a question about schwa. I'm going to actually take us to our Jamboard rather than, I don't know if I have it on a slide in this deck or not, but I do know it's in our Jamboard. So I'm going to take us all the way over here. And unfortunately move them around. Okay. So I want you to think for a moment about which word of these has the schwa sound. You can underline, you can put it into the chat box, and then we'll talk about why. And again, think about what I just said about stress. And the schwa sound is the most common sound in our language. Again, because of this stress issue. Okay, Wendy, talk about why you're saying apron has, which you're saying the O is a schwa in apron. Talk about it for us.
Because we don't say, I'm not a schwa expert by any means, but we don't say apron, we say apron.
You're kind of swallowing it. We say the swallowed. Yes, exactly. Because as we said, we are not stressing these equal. It's not a prawn. And like here, I have lady. Those are both pretty clear sounds. And the splat is a short ah, splat. Single syllable words are generally just all stressed. I say generally because, of course, the word the is not really stressed. We have the schwa in that sound, the. We don't say the. I would like the apple, please. Sometimes your accent might get there a bit, but it's swallowed. Like we have, I'd like a book versus an apple. Notice the a is a lot stronger in an apple than it would be in a book because it's swallowed. The book gets the stress, not the a, the a or the e and the. So Wendy is right. Apron, a is clear, but this is more of an sound, apron. And so when the schwa is the unaccented syllables. When I taught at, I hope you can hear me over this. Is that loud for you? Okay, good. I think my husband's filling the hot tub. So when I taught at Chartwell, we would say that the unaccented syllable didn't play by the rules. These are easy for reading, but they're trickier for spelling. Because I have to think about the fact that this is not its true sound. Now, we'll talk about that a bit more later. But I just wanted to introduce it here as we're thinking about what's happening in some of those syllables. Okay, so when I say co-articulated, we talked about that this morning, how they kind of blend together. It feels like it's one thing, and they make up the morphemes. So again, not all morphemes are syllables, but all words are morphemes. They're made up of one or more. So you said the word a, that's a morpheme, but s is a morpheme. It's not necessarily a syllable. Just like we saw with ed is a morpheme. Sometimes it's a syllable, sometimes it's not. Depends on the sound. So when I say all syllables contain one vowel sound, not always a vowel letter. Couple examples. How many syllables in, or this one's a good one. How many syllables in rhythm? Rhythm. There are 2 syllables, aren't there? Ism is 2 syllables. So this M is what's called a syllabic consonant here. The same thing will often have the L, like in bottle, becomes a syllabic consonant, that ul sound. So this is rhythm, and suffix ism have the pronounced syllable without a vowel at all. So those are the only 2 examples. So it's the vowel sound that's crucial here for a syllable. Notice when we had striped and scarred, they didn't have a vowel sound. And then I put this here just to remind us of our layers of language. Remember that the sentences are made up of phrases, which are made up of words, which can then be broken down into syllables, which can be broken up the first part with the onset, the rhyme, the rest of it. And then, of course, I should change the color of this to the individual sounds. I also like to show it in this way. This comes from, it says from Reading Rockets. I'll grab that link for you, but it's Carol Tolman. This is what she uses in her letters trainings. In fact, in one of our resources, there was a great video of Carol Tolman explaining this. But what I like about it is it helps us see that, notice how we have syllables both in spoken language and in written. And what she's illustrating here is this is where letters and sounds come together with that one-to-one correspondence. Like is represented by the M. So this is the auditory, this is what I say, the phonological, and this is what we see. And going from the smaller units here to larger units, and the smaller units here going to larger units. I'll clear all that off and give us a moment with some of these terms. Some of them may be unfamiliar. For example, inflection are suffixes that change like S and ED. Those are our inflections, ING. Which you notice we have the digraphs, 2 letters that make one sound, 3 letters that makes one sound. Vowel teams, I'm going to call vowel digraphs because it's just going in complexity though. Consonants are easier than vowels. Vowels are the hardest thing for kids. That we blend these together, it's more than one sound working together, that it's harder to squish and pull apart. They're squished, so hence it's harder to pull apart. Word families, inflections, etc. Because when it comes to syllabification, there is research that supports knowing syllables. I will say that there is some controversy. I'll address that on the next slide. But here's the positive here, is that it does help readers decode long words and knowing how to break them into syllables. It especially supports English language learners, and that it helps students read efficiently and spend less and less attention sounding out words letter by letter when they can go syllable by syllable. But when I say the controversy, some people say, well, it's not authentic when I divide, for example, the word middle here in the middle. Because if I say middle. I actually knew one person who would teach it when there are 2 consonants in the middle, like in rabbit, that your mouth is getting ready for the consonant B after the first one. So rab, notice how I stopped for rab, and then I go bit. I'm actually pronouncing the B in my second syllable, but I closed off the A with that B in the beginning. The same thing with middle. It's not middle, it's middle. So to help our kids recognize. So this is how we say it versus how we write it. And where we would divide in speech affectation versus affect has to do with the syllable, A and shun. So keep in mind these conventions that we use to divide words into syllables are for orthography, they're for the written form. They're not for how we say them. But it's a convention, it's a tool to use for kids to help pronounce things correctly. Okay, you need to get engaged again. Question is, have you thought about, and do you know all 6, I think Wendy does. Did you say that you've been letters trained, Wendy? So we'll have Wendy held back, but let's see if the rest of you can put in some of, if not all, of the 6 types of written syllables. A hint, there was an example in each, it's an example of each of them in that sentence that you see. Wendy, great question. I'll address that
Okay.
after they've pulled up all 6. So I'll give you a moment with this, and I'm going to see if I can get that sound off because it's really distracting for me. Okay, let's see. We have close and open have come in. I wonder if I can get them to come up one at a time versus. There we go. Closed and open. They've got the first 2 most common. Okay, that's better. I love people are saying magic-y. That's one way of putting the vowel consonant E. One other thing I would do with this is I teach them as a consonant E. I think you mean diphthong, Charlene, but yes. Don't you love how sometimes your fingers don't get the right things. We have an R controlled, I see. Someone says the R, or R influenced. And the E influence here is, I might say this one, how R is influencing the vowel, E is influencing the vowel, depending on how you want to call it with that. A lot of people are saying consonant LE, and the diphthong I'm going to call as vowel team. Some people can spread this out and call it either vowel teams and diphthongs. I've heard some people say 7 syllables. But the question is, I like to lump them, and I think it's easier for kids if we just say this is more than 1 or 2 or more letters that are working together to create a vowel sound. So whether it be a vowel digraph, a vowel trigraph, you can call it a vowel team. I actually want to change this to vowel digraphs or trigraphs because we use the word consonant digraphs and trigraphs. Why confuse kids with a new term? But this is the traditional 6-syllable types that you may have seen. The consonant LE, that's the, I see that in what you've put, I think, Charlene. So Wendy asked in the chat, when do we start teaching this? I would start teaching about closed syllables when I, in the very first start teaching kids to read. Kindergarten, first grade, we're talking about because this is the most common sound that we're going to talk about. When I show you this card, my cards, and all I'm going to teach you is that this makes the ass sound. Well, it doesn't make it anything. I don't hear anything, do I? When I see this, I want you to say apple, A, apple, This is the name of the letter. The key word is apple, and the sound is a. Later on, when we're getting to the fact that it could also say a, it could also say we'll do those later. We're going to start with that closed because it's the most common. Now, when I was teaching kids with dyslexia, I would not go into any of the others for a while. I would really spend a lot of time with this closed because I wanted them to get that down. I also did not do my open next. I skipped that because I was not ready to work with multisyllabic words. And there are very few open syllable words that are that are single syllable, sorry. So we would spend a lot of time on number 1. We would get into number 3, we would get into number 2, 4, even number 5, because 2 and 6, you can do 2 with single syllable words, but there aren't very many. So I would skip that and I would work on the single syllable words for a long time, make sure that they're comfortable with those. Then when we're ready to get into multisyllabic words, I would introduce the open syllables and the consonant LE. But I wanted to make sure that I'm paying attention to my students' needs and their abilities first. Those words for my kids, even 5th and 6th graders with dyslexia, I spend a lot of time on the single syllable ones first. I will be showing you a video tomorrow, next week, where a first grade teacher illustrates for her kids the difference between open and closed. And it's appropriate, I think, in referencing the flexibility kids need to do with letters. So as we think about the fact that this could be an E or it could be an E, which one is it going to be? Because it's at the end of the syllable, there's nothing that follows it, it's going to be E. So they have to think about that flexibility, which will be very crucial later on in their reading. But it's a great place to start that. But actually, I would start it even before they get into the vowels, and I would start that with your letter S. This is the best place to start flexibility because really, really early on, they recognize that S can make S or Z. Think about is and has and was. Is a word they learn really, really early on. And rather than teach it as a crazy word, let's help them see that S represents 2 different sounds. S as in snake or sick or silly, or Z as in is and was and has. It's a very, very commonly place for them to start flexibility. That flexibility is something that they're going to be focusing on when they look at that difference between closed and open as well. Okay, I'm seeing that we have 5 minutes left. Let's see if there are other pieces that I wanted to share on this. I will leave you with a resource And we'll talk about a little bit about Appendix A. We talked a little bit about it last time, but I'm going to open it up for us to, I don't think this link works anymore, to look at these syllable types and have a conversation about some of the places that, actually, this is probably faster just to look at it this way, if you can see it as well. So number one, actually, I'm going to show you those resources. Common Core Appendix A we'll look at this way, but I also want to show you the handout that is from my colleague, Kate. Is this Clover? Wendy, when you went through letters, I assume they didn't use Clover. They did the 6 syllable types like we showed them.
Yeah, and then I've had really great reading, and they use Velcro.
Velcro, I like that too. I've seen that. Where VELCRO. I like that, but again, I kind of like starting with close because it's the most common. So, and which Clover does. Velcro I likes because it makes it big sticky. So the Clover one is in our resources, our ADA compliance. And what I like that Kate did is that on the first page, it's all single syllable words. And on their second page, it's multisyllabic words. Which, of course, recognizing that the open does not have many single syllables. So you go here, she has a few of them. She, go, my, hi, shy. The consonant LE, this is, you're not going to have these in single syllable words. So she's highlighting the BLE, TLE, ZLE, FLE. We have some examples of closed, open, vowel teams, and then we have the multisyllabic examples where they're just closed and then they're mixed that are useful for teaching. Going back to the Common Core Appendix A, though, one thing I want to point out is if you do go to page 21 and you see these syllable patterns, keep in mind, how do I put this nicely? They're not consistent in their presentation here, and there are a few little errors. So notice how they divided these 3, except beverage is actually 3 syllables. So again, keep that in mind. Dapple, hostel, beverage is 3. And it's interestingly, they put a dash between these. They didn't put a dash between these 2. Compete and despite, or program and table and recent. Beautiful, that one's fine. Trainer, congeal, spoilage is okay. The oi is a weird one, spoil, and then edge. Injurious, consort, charter, dribble, they should have divided for us between the 2 B's, drib and bull, beagle before the E and the A and the G, and little between the 2 T's. So sometimes they divided them, sometimes they didn't. So next time we'll get into discussing each of the different types. We'll have to watch a video next week about with a first grade teacher going in close and open. So Wendy, I think that when in answering your question, it depends on what your kids are ready for and what they're being exposed to. I mean, even the word little, they get exposed to really early on. However, writing them is going to be a lot harder for those than reading them. So I think that it depends on their exposure and whether or not your program is uses decodables, which will be more focused on some of these closed ones, hopefully, and then building up to, I mean, these are commonly used in those, like especially little and turtle and things like that, but helping them recognize that this is a tricky syllable type. And now we're getting into multisyllabic words. And hopefully most of your early grades are really focusing on closed, maybe some open. You're going to get these vowel consonant E very, very often. These vowel teams come in early, so does the vowel R. I mean, these are all ones that are emphasized even, I think by the end of 2nd grade, you're expected to know all of them. However, you can do it in a slow way that focuses on one at a time and showing again how these patterns go together. Grouping them by patterns will be the best tool for you for making sure that you're not confusing your students. Okay, it is now 12:30, so this is where we're going to resume next week. And so here are some things that you can be exploring in the meantime. I'll go and find for you the Common Core Appendix A before you leave. And I will pause the record, actually stop the recording there.